He got caught. You heard it right there, and I speak with you tonight on a different type of evening because the evidence is in. 2 weeks of public testimony, stunning revelations, and current Trump administration staff turning on the president. This is all part of why we can tell you tonight impeachment's hitting a new phase. The cooperative witnesses have spoken. The House Democrats say that means they don't really need any other resisting witnesses like Bolton or Mulvaney because those witnesses who have testified, who have turned over evidence, are providing the informational ammunition that is needed to move forward. Schiff's committee working on a written report of findings with a preview of their theory of the case this week.
Bribery, for those watching at home, is the conditioning of official acts in exchange for something of personal value. The idea of withholding that military aid to get these political investigations should be anathema, repugnant to every American, because it means the sacrifice not just of Ukrainian national security, but American national security for the interests of the president personally and politically.
Schiff will now hand the findings over once he produces the report to the Judiciary Committee, run, of course, by Jerry Nadler, and they would draft any potential articles of impeachment. That's how the process works. Now, if you thought the public hearings that we've seen so far have been dramatic, and they have, just wait for the judiciary. Those hearings could be wild. We know that from precedent, because under the rules and the past practice, Donald Trump's lawyers could come in and potentially question witnesses who appear, just as Bill Clinton's lawyers questioned Ken Starr himself in those hearings on Clinton impeachment the nation watched riveted. Now, no matter who is doing the questioning, the facts of the case that we've heard thus far are not good for President Trump.
Was there a quid pro quo? The answer is yes. I followed the directions of the president. We did not want to work with Mr. Giuliani. Simply put, we were playing the hand we were dealt. Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it. Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret.
We bring in our special panel now. Michelle Cottle, member of the New York Times editorial board, who's covered Washington since the Clinton administration. Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor at Slate, who writes about the Supreme Court and hosts their Legal Affairs podcast. And Peter Emerson, who was an aide to the member of the Judiciary Committee during the Nixon impeachment, drafting these articles in a different context, and has worked or advised every Democratic administration since Carter. Good evening to all of you. What did you think stood out when you take it all together this past week?
I think the split screen, Ari. I think the fact that we saw lifers in the Foreign Service, lifers in the military, people who think about briefing books and who think deeply about protocol and processes, nobody overheated, nobody dramatic, persuasive, layer after layer corroborating the whistleblower report. And then on the other side, it was Hunter Biden, and it was Ukraine, and it was Chalupa, and it was Benghazi. I mean, it was just, there was no corresponding truth. There was no meeting of the minds about even what the alleged crime was, much less what it is we were even investigating.
Peter, take a listen to how Adam Schiff wrapped it all up after these 2 weeks of hearings.
The day after Bob Mueller testified, the day after Bob Mueller testified that Donald Trump invited Russian interference, the day after that, Donald Trump is back on the phone asking another nation to involve itself in another U.S. election. That says to me, this president believes he is above the law, beyond accountability. And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law.
Strong summation in your view?
Strong summation that will have little or no effect at all. The Congress is going into recess for the Thanksgiving holiday, as you know. The bunkers have been concreted. They're closed up. You're talking 35-40% on both sides. There's a small margin of independence that will make up their minds as we get closer. But we're in a context of history we've never seen before. We have a Democratic Party that's going through a traditional blow up of everything. We're moving into a political season in just a couple of months. And most importantly, as Dahlia pointed out, we have no agreement on truth or facts. No one can agree whether the sky is blue or whether chocolate, whether it be dark or light, is black or chocolate.
Well, what do you think of the substance of this compared to the Watergate example you have some experience in?
The Watergate hearings were committed by both sides, bipartisan.
Substance, not process, Peter. Substance.
Substance, yeah. They were looking.
No, I'm asking you.
Oh, I see.
I'm pressing you because I get people in here who want to tell me they can see the future. And I got news for you and everyone else at home. The people on television can't see in the future better than anyone else. 6 months ago, people would sit at tables like this and say, Pelosi's not impeaching, because they could see the future, but they were wrong. So I guess what I'm pressing you on is the evidence that we saw this week. Your view of that as it compares to the evidence that came out in the Watergate hearings.
Obstruction of justice, abuse of power, contempt of Congress were the 3 articles of impeachment against Nixon. Kind of matches up with what we've seen this week. The other 2 were the bombing of Cambodia and the tax evasion by Nixon. Those were forgotten. One of the big things that is missed here, I agree, he's going to be impeached by the House Judiciary Committee. No question about that. There are serious problems with Chairman Nadler in terms of you pointing out it's going to be a wild scene, given that he doesn't seem to have the capacity nor the will to discipline the way Schiff did in his committee.
And that's interesting, and I think something that goes to how the evidence comes out. You're saying that there were different approaches, which is part of why Schiff's committee got so much farther?
That and also the decision to move it to Schiff's committee. Think of Schiff's committee as Sam Erwin in the Watergate committee in the beginning. Then it was passed to Peter Rodino in the Judiciary Committee. There's another very important point about all of this, is that bills are passed, legislative bills are passed with amendments. And in a very famous scene from senior staff during the Watergate staffing, Jack Brooks, the congressman from Texas, walked in and said, don't forget how a bill is passed. You can't have just one article of impeachment. You need to provide the opportunity for Republicans and Democrats to say, listen, I thought carefully, I considered it, I voted against 2, but I voted for 1. So there are going to be, I suspect,
very interesting,
3 articles. On the other hand, if there's only 1, it gives Democrats perhaps a better chance at taking back the Senate. Say Susan Collins would have to vote either yes or no, puts her in greater jeopardy. There are so many levels of chess being played here that it's just extraordinarily complicated. But wild is the perfect world that we're going to move into in a couple of weeks.
Dahlia, your view on that, on the potential articles?
Yeah, I think that, I've heard lots of chatter all along about Democrats are going too narrow. Ukraine is the tip of the iceberg. We should be doing emoluments. We should be doing self-enrichment. We should be doing all the corruption. We should be doing the racism. And I think the decision to really winnow it down to a conversation about this one moment in time, this phone call, this quid pro quo, this extortion scheme, was a decision to make it simple and clear and understandable. There was a huge menu to choose from. They decided to go straight up the middle on something that they felt the public could understand.
Right. And that goes to what became so clear. And Michelle, the other thing that to Dahlia's point is clear and simple, whether people agree with it or not, this is no longer a bad apples defense. Mr. Sondland works for the president, testified, got on a plane, and continued his representation of the president abroad and said this wasn't bad apples, this wasn't shadow, it was all rotten apples. It was all, the shadow was the policy. Some of that was underscored even in Republican questioning. Take a look.
Did anyone else express any concerns to you about this, the so-called irregular channel?
I'm not sure how someone could characterize something as an irregular channel when you're talking to the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the Chief of Staff of the White House, the Secretary of Energy.
What was he doing there, and how does that affect people's understanding of how high this went?
This was an important point for him to make because there had been some talk about whether Republican lawmakers and others, in order to protect the president, were going to throw some people under the bus. Sondland, Rudy Giuliani, Mick Mulvaney. With his testimony, the ambassador was making very clear that this was not some rogue action that a couple of people were involved in. This was the regular channel that the president himself was directing. And he said that repeatedly, that it was the understanding that they had to work with Rudy Giuliani because this was coming straight from the desires of President Trump.
Take a look as well at Ken Starr, who was, of course, the face and the prosecutor in the last impeachment Americans lived through, who has been providing his running commentary on Fox News. Not all of it super supportive. Here's a little bit of it.
The chairman began with essentially pulling out the Richard Nixon articles of impeachment, figuratively speaking. And he pointed to the third article, contempt. Contempt in the sense of you've stood in the way of this investigation. Then Ambassador Sondland spoke vehemently and bitterly about his lack of access to records to help him. I think the articles of impeachment are being drawn up if they haven't already been drawn up.
Michelle, there's been much talk about where the parties stand. What does it tell you that conservative legal voices like Mr. Starr, conservatives in the movement like Reagan aide Peggy Noonan, did sound more starkly critical this week as they appraised the evidence in public?
There were a couple of moments that I think surprised everybody during these hearings. One was Sondland talking about, making very clear that he had been denied access to these documents that he wanted, and that he thought that they should be turned over to the committee as well. The other one was during Marie Yovanovitch's testimony when Trump started tweeting at her, and Chairman Schiff stopped the proceedings to make clear that he was willing to consider this intimidation of a witness, which also prompted a lot of surprise remarks and commentary from conservatives across the social media and regular media. And I think that those sorts of things will come back in the articles of impeachment discussions, definitely.
Peter?
I think she's right. I think the ultimate challenge, though, given my experience in '74, where you had 3 networks, people who missed it during the day, even though millions were focused on it, came back at 6:30 at night, Walter Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley, PBS with Bill Moyers. Now there's so many...
Shout out to Bill Moyers.
And there was a real attempt on all sides to get the truth, just as you're trying to do here and the media is doing in general. But today there are so many platforms of disinformation that it's almost impossible for the public to actually go through this. And second, it's delivered on so many different methodologies as well, it becomes extremely difficult. The word surprise to me no longer is in my vocabulary when it comes to Donald Trump. And I think for the most part, that's true of anyone. I don't see a smoking gun coming up. I mean, even some sort of embrace of Putin physically isn't going to surprise anyone. It's pretty clear he's looking forward to Putin taking America back.
I think that the most important thing that Peter is saying is that what is different is this is packaged. In the moment, it is Donald Trump is witness tampering in real time. A minute later, it's gone. It's gone. It's not on Fox News. This week, we have unbelievably damning a roll-up of Mick Mulvaney, of Mike Pence, of everyone by Sondland. It's gone. It's not on Fox News. And I think the idea that there are these lasting, permanent, distilled moments of gotcha, I think that's a Watergate era thing.
Right. I got to fit in a break, but it's all very, very important stuff to consider as you look towards what the Judiciary Committee does with these facts and what the public understands the facts to be. Dahlia Lithwick and Peter Emerson here, Michelle Cottle in Washington. Thanks to each of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.